Hello and welcome to the channel. Today's tutorial is on how to make this beautiful gathered basque shaped dress with gathered underbust yoke. If this is what you would like to learn, please watch to the end of this video. My appreciation goes to all my subscribers and returning viewers. You are amazing and I love you all. And if this is your first time seeing my video or checking out my channel, you're welcome. Please click on the subscribe button to subscribe now and also give this video a thumbs up. So the first thing I will do will be to draft out my front bodice pattern. The edge of this paper will act as my shoulder line. From the edge of the paper, I would measure to my chest line, my waist line and my hip line. So from the edge of the paper to 8 inches is my chest line, from the edge of the paper to 15 inches is my waist line, and from the edge of the paper to 23 inches is my hip line, and I've ruled across these vertical measurements. Using the 3-inch, 8-inch standard for shoulder slope, I would get my shoulder slope. I would note the 3-inch points and the 8-inch points. And on the 8-inch point, I came down by 1 inch and I connected to the 3-inch points, and that would be for my shoulder slope. And then on the shoulder line, I'm going to impute 7 inches, which is half of my shoulder measurement. I would impute 7 inches and also impute 7 inches on the chest line. Then I'll connect these points together, connecting from the chest line up towards the shoulder slope. Then on the chest line, I'm going to impute 8.5 inches, which is quarter of my bust measurement. Then I'll check the measurement I have between the shoulder slope line and the chest line. I'll find the midpoint, and at the midpoint I came in by half an inch. With this, I'll form the front armhole curve. I will connect from the shoulder slope line to the half inch I came in by, and then to the measurement on the chest line, the bust measurement on the chest line. So I've connected, and this would be for the front armhole. Before I continue, I would label the chest line, the waist line and the hip line for easy understanding. Next, I will impute half of my nipple to nipple measurement. My nipple to nipple measurement is 8 inches. Half of that is 4 inches. So I imputed that on the waist line and on the hip line. And then from the shoulder line, I will measure 1 inch below the bust point line. And 1 inch below the bust point line I'm working with for this tutorial is 10 inches. So I would also impute 4 inches, half of the nipple to nipple measurements there. And I will rule a straight line connecting these points. Now I'm going to take my dart on the waist, half inch on both sides of this line I ruled. So I'll be connecting the dart to 2 inches before the hip line and to the point I have above the 10 inches line. So that is what I'm doing now. I'm connecting my dart 2 inches, the dart to stop 2 inches before the hip line, and I'll connect it to the 10 inches from the shoulder line, that is 1 inch below the bust point. I will impute 8.5 inches on the waist line, that is quarter of the waist measurement plus 1 inch for that. On the hip, I will impute 10 inches, which is quarter of the hip measurement, and I'll connect from the chest line, the measurement on the chest line to the waist line, and the measurement on the waist line to the hip line. I will also add my sewing allowance of 1.5 inches on the chest line, the waist line and hip line, and connect the points. For the neckline, I would be using a neck width of 3 inches and a neck depth of 3.25 inches for the front neckline. So that is what I've measured, 3 inches by 3.25 inches, and I would use my French curve to make a curve for the front neckline. So like I said in the beginning, the yoke is going to be an underbust yoke. So what I'm going to do now will be to measure from the shoulder line to 12 inches, which is the length of the underbust I'm working with in this tutorial. So I've measured from the shoulder to 12 inches, which is the underbust line, and I'm going to rule across this measurement. So So the next thing I will do now will be to measure from the at the center front. I will measure down to 8.5 inches. That is how low I want the yoke to be at the center front. So I would note that at that point I'm going to come in by 1/2 inch. I would come inward 1/2 inch and make this into a straight line. Then I'm going to connect this 1/2 inch I came inward by. I'm going to connect it using a French curve. I'm going to connect it to the underbust. You can see how I placed my French curve, and I'm going to connect from this point to the underbust, the dart closest to this point, the inner dart leg. That is how I'm connecting from this point down to that measurement, as you can see. Then at the armhole area, I'm also going to measure down by 8.5 inches like I did at the center front. Then I would measure what I have, the angle formed. You can see this angle. I will find what I have there and divide that into 2. Then what I have, I'm going to place it at the 8.5 inches I came down by, and then complete my curve. Because I'm making a curve, I'm going to connect from this measurement down to the underbust. So I connected to the underbust, as you can see me demonstrate. So this 8.5 inches I came down by from the shoulder, I'm going to extend that into the seam allowance. So I'm just extending that. You can see what I did. I came down from there to the chest line by 1/2 inch, that is 8.5, and connected. Then I would check what I have on the shoulder measurement, what I have remaining. I found the midpoint, and from that midpoint I noted I'm going to make a straight line connecting it to where my dart stopped, as I just demonstrated. So that's it for the yoke. I've labeled the yoke. Now for the basque effect at the lower part, so you can decide how much you want for the basque. You can go for 3 inches or 4 inches, but for this tutorial I will be using 5 inches. So that's how much I want for the basque. So starting from my seam allowance, I've placed my ruler in a slanted form, and I've connected to the edge of my paper, because actually the length remaining after taking other measurements is 5 inches. So I'll go ahead and cut out my pattern. So as you're watching, if you're yet to subscribe to this channel, please click on the subscribe button now to subscribe. So this is the front part. I'll quickly show you what the back part looks like. So I've drafted a basic bodice pattern for the back. Okay, the only difference from the back and the front is that I have the zipper allowance, the zipper allowance I used here is 1.5 inches, and for the shoulder loop for the back part I came down at the 8 inches point by 1/2 inch, and for the armhole curve I didn't come in by 1/2 inch like I did in front. So that's the only difference. Everything is the same. The dart for the back would stop 1 inch below the chest line, and for the basque effect the same 5 inches I took is what I did for the back part. So for the neckline at the back, I would take a neck width of 3 inches and a neck depth of 1.25 inches. So for the back yoke, I'm going to come down 2 inches below the chest line. Remember, the chest line is 8 inches, so from that point I'm going to come down by 2 inches, and at the armhole region I came down by 1/2 inch from the chest line, so it corresponds with what I have in front. So from this point, from the armhole region, I'm going to place my ruler to connect to the 2 inches I came down by at the center back. So you can see how I've placed my ruler, and I'll just connect these 2 points and I'll extend it into my zipper allowance. And then for the basque at the front and the back, like I said before, are the same length. So I'm labeling my zipper allowance and I've labeled my yoke as well. I'll go ahead and cut out the back pattern. So note that the same allowance that is used in the front is the same allowance used at the back. So I used the same 1.5 inches allowance at the back, just like I did for the front parts. So these are the patterns. This is for the front and the back, so you can see what I have. So I'm going to keep the back pattern aside, and then we'll work on the front one. First thing I will do will be to separate the yoke from the pattern, from from the front pattern. So I'm going to cut through my yoke. You can see the part labeled yoke, so I'm going to cut that out. So because I want to gather the yoke, I'm going to cut through the line I have. I'm going to cut from the underbust to the line I have running towards the shoulder part, so that when I slash through this line, I'm going to spread and introduce volume so that I have something to pleat, to have extra so that I can pleat or gather that, because this yoke is going to be a gathered yoke. So I've brought a new piece of paper and I'm going to spread my yoke pattern on this paper. So you can spread as much as you are comfortable with. So I'm going to spread as much as 3 inches. So you can make yours lesser. You can go for 2 inches or for 1.5 inches. So all you spread depends on the gathers you want at the underbust, and you don't want it to be too much. So I'm going to use a masking tape to hold my yoke pattern on this new pattern so that it becomes one, so that when I cut out the spread part, everything would just be one pattern. So I'm using my tape to hold down my yoke, and I've measured to make sure that I have the 3 inches I want. So I'm going to use a curve ruler to connect this extra so that it becomes a continuous curve. You can see what I did, so that it becomes continuous with the pattern I have. So I'll go ahead and cut out the extra I don't need on the pattern. So this is what I have. Okay, so I'm going to cut on my fabric. I'm going to cut the yoke on the plain fabric and the other part of the bodies on the Ankara fabric. So to do that, I'm going to cut through my waistline, because I do not want, I want to close the darts from the underbust to the waist. So to do that, I'm going to cut through one of the lines, the dart legs, and I'm going to close in. That is, I'm removing my dart. So I'll use a masking tape to hold this together. I do not want to sew the dart on this point, so that is why I'm cutting and closing or removing my dart. So I would go ahead and then use this to cut out my fabric. So all this is the front. These are the pieces for the front pattern. So they will be all cut on fold. I would have to fold my fabric to cut them. And when I cut, I'm going to add 1/2 inch allowances all around where I have to join them back. So I would add that, but I wouldn't be adding any other side seam allowance, because that has been taken care of on the pattern. I've transferred my pattern on my fabric, so I cut out the yoke parts. You can see I also cut out a lining piece for the yoke, and the same with the other parts for the front. I also cut out a lining piece for each part of them. So I would turn the neckline of the yoke, and then I will sew in the dart for the lower parts. So as you can see, I've turned the neckline with the lining piece, but at this point I decided that I do not want it to be lined. I would rather turn it into a facing. So I'm cutting off my yoke. I'm reducing my yoke and leaving about 3 inches of length. So I do not want to use the lining. I don't want it to be bulky, since I'm going to have to pleat the underbust area. So at the underbust region, you can see I've made a running stitch. I made a gather stitch, and I'm just dragging that. I made it for each cup, so you can see it didn't get at the midpoint. So each gather stitch for each cup. So I'm dragging it so that it fits. It comes back to the original measurement I had before I added that extra 3 inches. So this is what I have. I will gather it so that it fits into this part of the Ankara. You can see, so it fits in. So I'll make sure I gather that everything would match. So I'll gather them together. So how I'm going to sew this will be to turn them right sides facing each other, the yoke on top of the Ankara. I'm going to pin them together first of all, so that it matches. The yoke should match with what I have at the Ankara side. I'll pin that and show you, and then tell you how you're going to sew them together. I've pinned everything together, the yoke to the Ankara piece. So you can see how I've pinned everything. So to sew this, for this to be easy to join, what I'm going to do is to start from the midpoint. I'm going to start joining. I'll join 1 cup first. I'll sew to the armhole region for 1 cup, and then I'll flip to the other side and start from where I stopped at the midpoint, and then sew to the armhole area of the other cup. That way it will be very easy to join, and that is what I did in this case. So you can see what I have. I've joined them like I explained, so you can see it's looking neat and beautiful. Okay, so I've joined them together. You can see what I have. At this point, I'm going to use my lining piece to cover up the seam I've made. I don't want it to look rough on the inner part. So what I'm going to do is to sandwich the yoke in between the Ankara and the lining, and then I'm going to pin the lining exactly where I've sewn, joining the yoke together. So I'm going to still pin them together like I did when I was attaching the yoke. After pinning them together, I'm going to sew my lining piece very close or on top of the line I have already made, joining the yoke. So that is what I'll do, and then I'll show you what I have. So you can see how I pinned them. I've pinned everything together, so I would then sew very close to the first stitch I've made. So guys, this is it. I've sewn. So you can see the second stitch I made attaching the lining, I did on a black thread. So you can see it's very close to the white thread. So I've done this. All I have to do now, you can see that it's not relaxed properly. So to make it relaxed very well, I'm going to notch on the seams I've made. I'm going to notch all through the seams. This is a curve, so I have to notch it to make it relaxed. I'll notch very close to the seams, but I will not cut through the seams. Once you cut through the seams, your dress will start loosening from that point. So I'm going to notch very carefully, especially at the center front area. You have to notch properly there so that everything relaxes well. So I'm going to do that. I'll notch all around and then iron properly so that everything looks relaxed. So after notching, if you also want to go a bit further, you can top stitch as much as you can. So I will do that in for this tutorial. I'm going to top stitch towards the lining piece. I'll top stitch as much as I can. I know I cannot top stitch at the center part, so I have done that. I top stitch as much as I could, and I've ironed. You can see how relaxed this points loose. So the next thing now will be to attach the lower part. I've sewn in my darts. I'm going to place them right sides facing each other and sew using the 1/2 inch allowance I have for it. The lining as well, right sides facing each other. I'll attach them and then I'll show you what I have. So at this point, I've attached everything. I ironed the seams open. You can see the seams I have joining everything. So I'm going to use the lining piece now to turn the sides, the front side. So I'm flipping them right sides facing each other with the yoke in between them. I'm going to pin them properly to match, and then I'm going to sew on the two sides. I'm going to use 1/2 inch to turn the main fabric. So quickly the back, I'm going to cut out my yoke. I'm cutting out the yoke, and then I would also close in the 1/2 length dart like I did in front. So I'm cutting out the 1/2 length the same way I did for the front. I'm going to cut through the dart, close it up, and then cut out. Use this pattern to cut out the back pieces. The back pieces I'll cut each 2 for each pattern. It will not be cut on fold. So that is what I would do, and add allowances where required. These are my back patterns. I used bias strip to turn the neckline for the back. So I'm going to make sure that the corresponding sides match. So I'll check which side is the zipper. Using my pattern, I'll place them the right way and join them right sides facing each other. I'm attaching the yoke, and then the lower part as well, I'll sew in the dart and also attach them. I'll do the same for the lining piece, and then I'm going to use the lining piece to turn. Okay, you can see how I did them. I turned them, I joined them at where I attached the yoke, and I'll also use the lining piece to turn the sides like I did in the front part. So this is it for the back part. I've done everything and I've ironed. I will then go ahead and attach my zipper at the back. For the front part, I've ironed out everything, and you can see how relaxed and beautiful it's looking inside and outside. It's looking fine. So the thing I'm going to do now will be to join the front to the back. The first place I'm going to join will be the shoulder. So I'm going to place them right sides facing each other. Then I'm going to remember that the front side has a yoke, so has a facing. So I'm going to flip the facing to the other side. You can see how I'm holding them at the shoulder. Then I'll flip the facing to the other side, and so that the seam made at the shoulder line will be covered. It will be hidden because of how I would sew them. And then I'm going to join them at the sides using the allowance I have left. I've used half inch to 10 with the lining, so I would sew with 1 inch. So as you can see, I've joined them together. Everything is joined at the shoulder and at the sides. So far, this is what our dress looks like. It's looking beautiful. Okay, so the next thing I'll do will be to measure all I have at the length I have. So starting from the shoulder, I'll measure the longest part, which is the center front of this dress, and what I have is 28.5 inches, and the 0.5 inch is for joining allowance, for joining the gathered parts. The full length I want for this dress at the longest point, that's at the center front, is 39 inches. So 39 minus 28 will give me 11 inches. That means that the length for the gathered part is 11 inches, and to that 11 inches I will be adding extra 2 inches, 1.5 inches for hemming one end of the gathered fabric, and half inch for joining it to this dress. And for the width, I'm going to measure what I have at the hem part of this dress. So when I measured, the total I had was 46 inches. So to that, I'm going to multiply that 46 by 2 or 2.5 inches. You can multiply as much as 3 inches depending on your fabric, but I multiplied by 2.5. So I would just attach this, gather it and attach it to the dress. So for the sleeves, I made a sleeve with a slit at the center, and I have a video on how to make this sleeve on my channel, and I'll drop the link in the description box. So thank you guys, this is it for how to make this beautiful dress. Thank you for watching. Please don't forget to give this video a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel if you're yet to subscribe, and also click on the notification bell beside the subscribe button so that you'll be notified every time I upload a new video. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye.